Hey Merfolk fans, I'm Joe. Thanks very much for joining me today. If you'd like to support my channel, please check out the link above to my Patreon page. It's been a little while since my last upload, but I wanted to check in with you guys and show you where I am with the deck. I'm still on mono blue. I tried the white splash for a little while with my friend Kyle. You guys saw that in our flavor of the week a little while ago, and not really feeling the green splash right now. So I've been on mono blue, and along with a couple guys in the Discord, we've been talking a lot about the shape of mono blue and what feels best right now in the metagame. So this deck here is where I am as of this morning. And yeah, let's start off with Spell Pierce. I've got a full playset of Spell Pierce in this list right now. Rothgar and Kyle Stoneheart have been running a playset of Spell Pierce and doing pretty well with it. And it's a card that I have not always loved in Modern Merfolk, but there's been an interesting sort of evolution of this discussion around 1-drops in our deck. And I think the theory of 1-drops is a little bit better formed now. I think those who play the deck a lot kind of have a better idea of what we're looking for in a 1-drop, why we want 1-drops, why we may or may not want the 1-drop creatures that we have access to currently, like Curse Catcher or Mistcaller, those kinds of things. So the reason I didn't like Spell Pierce for a long time was that it often feels like a dead card. You know, once you get to turn 7, 8, 9 against a control deck or a Tron deck, they're going to have way too much mana for Spell Pierce to be relevant. Now, the main plan of Merfolk is to establish a really strong board with our Lords, Silvergills in the first 3, 4, 5 turns and really pressure the opponent's life total. If they manage to survive past those turns, hopefully their life total is pretty close to 0 and we can just kind of lean on them for the rest of the game and close things out. Now, if the games go to turn 7, turn 8, turn 9, turn 10, yes, Spell Pierce gets significantly worse than in the first few turns of the game. However, it's just part of Merfolk's strategy that once we get to those turns, we're not going to be heavily favored in any matchup. Any deck that takes us that far in the game has sort of broken our strategy a little bit. And yes, Spell Pierce might be kind of dead then, but honestly, at that point, pretty much all of our cards are dead. What are you going to do on turn 10 against a control deck? You know, you're going to top deck a Master of Waves at best, and then they can just answer it with a Path or a Snapcaster and a Path. So the strategy here is win pretty quickly, and Spell Pierce really helps us do that. Now, the idea with 1-drops is that we don't really have a lot of them in the deck, right? The deck is mostly 2-drops, a few 3-drops, a few 4-drops. But we really want things to do on turn 1, since we are a pretty aggressive deck. So obviously AEther Vial is always going to be our best turn 1 play, but we want things to be able to do on turn 1 when we don't draw AEther Vial, and Spell Pierce is a really excellent option for that. There are plenty of decks that run things we would like to counter on turn 1. Against Storm, on turn 1, if they play even a Serum Visions, you're probably just going to counter that. You use your mana efficiently. You prevent them from scrying the top of their deck. You prevent them from drawing a card. It might not seem super high impact, but all of those effects add up for Storm. And they need all of their Serum Visions and Sleight of Hands to draw into the spells that they use for their Storm turn, like all of the rituals and their payoff spells like Gifts Ungiven and Past in Flames. So the strategy with Spell Pierce, the best way to use it is against virtually every deck. Just snap it off whenever you have mana available, especially on turn 1, especially on turn 3 after you play a 2-drop and you have 1 mana left. Go ahead and play your Spell Pierce, slow the opponent down, use your mana more efficiently, attack in those early turns with your creatures. That's the best way to make use of Spell Pierce. You don't want to be precious with it. Say against Tron, if they play a turn 1 Expedition map, and you're like, oh, well, I'm going to hold Spell Pierce for Karn, or I'm going to hold Spell Pierce for Oblivion Stone. It's a really terrible approach to do it that way because, as you well know, the opponent can resolve the Expedition map, and then on turn 3, they just slam a Wormcoil Engine when you left mana up for Spell Pierce, and now you're behind, both because you left up mana for Spell Pierce, and because the opponent got to resolve their Expedition map and And now they're super far ahead on mana and their development with a Wormcoil on the board. So counter that Expedition map, counter Sylvan Scrying. That's what Spell Pierce is in the deck for. It works alongside our early pressure, Lords, Silvergills, etc. So we have plays on turn 1 with AEther Vial and Spell Pierce. Of course, there's turn 3 where you have 3 lands. You want to be able to cast a Silvergill Adept or any other 2-drop and still have up mana for Spell Pierce. If you draw late AEther Vial, that kind of thing. This is where 1-drops come in handy on turns 1 and 3. Once you get to turn 5 and you have odd mana, sure, you can play 2-2-drops and leave up mana for Spell Pierce. That comes up sometimes, but it's mainly for turn 1 and for turn 3. Now, I think Spell Pierce, for me, is a little higher impact over sort of the entire metagame than options like Peak, which Nikachu popularized in the last month or so, month or two maybe. Peak lets us see the opponent's hand. It does draw us into another card. It's a really, really good card. And I think we're still kind of learning how it can best be used in Merfolk and what the advantages and disadvantages are to the card. But for me, in my experience in testing Peak, a lot of times you're just cycling it, and the hand information that you're seeing of the opponent is not always super relevant. They're just going to keep playing their creatures that you see, or they're going to keep playing their removal that you see. Spell Pierce, on the other hand, can counter a Liliana, can counter a Karn, and counter a lot of high-impact spells. And countering something is often, where we want to be. So I'm enjoying Spell Pierce at the 1-drop spot. I cut Curse Catcher a long time ago, along with many of you other Merfolk pilots. Some of you guys are on Mistcaller. It's really, really good in certain matchups like Collected Company decks, against Dredge, against Arclight decks. But in general, in most matchups in Modern, it's too close to being Curse Catcher, too close to being Merfolk of the Pearl Trident. So in general, that's just not a strong enough card to include. So that's why I've landed on Spell Pierce. Very, very recently, added in 2 Harbingers back to the deck. This guy had been cut recently by most pilots, because maybe it seemed that we were getting by just fine with Trickster as far as tempo plays go, slow down the opponent's creatures while we continue to attack with ours. And also, there's kind of a really strong majority opinion right now that Phantasmal Image is amazing in the deck, in the format. We have a number of good enter the battlefield effects between Silvergills, Master of Waves, and Trickster. That Phantasmal Image seems great, especially when you have other creatures in the format that are great to copy. You've got Thought-Knot Seers and Reality Smashers and Wormcoil Engines, things like that. Tarmogoyfs, Dark Confidants. Plenty of good things to copy with Phantasmal Image, so this guy often gets tons of value. And his clause about sacrificing him if he gets targeted is often not particularly relevant, because the targeting effect would have killed any creature anyway, like a Fatal Push or a Lightning Bolt or something like that. So up until today, really, I had been running a playset of Phantasmal Images like most other pilots, I think, these days. Trimmed down to 3 on Image and 3 on Reejerey to make space for 2 Harbingers. Now, there are a ton of creatures in Modern, and I think having some number of Harbingers in the deck is appropriate. Bouncing the opponent's creature is exactly what Merfolk wants to be doing to push that early aggression that I've been mentioning. When Trickster was spoiled, it became clear that there was going to be some development, some experimentation with the numbers, the balancing between Tricksters and Harbingers in the deck. And initially we ran 4 of each, and then, as I said, people recently moved away from Harbinger. I personally feel like I'm ready to move back towards Harbinger, but I don't think we need a full 4 and 4. Trickster is too good as a flash creature to trim at all. I think this is now officially a core 4 of in the deck. But we do want some number of Harbingers. Now, I was a little bit torn on what to trim in the deck to make space for these 2 Harbingers. And, you could go down to Reejerey's, which cuts your Lord amount. It also cuts your number of sort of must-answer threats if you trim too many Reejereys. If you play a Reejerey and the opponent doesn't answer it, that often wins the game because you get to use your mana to cast like 4 more creatures and often just win in one big attack. So I love that power that Reejerey brings to the deck. And as I was saying earlier, Phantasmal Image gets just so much value all the time. It hasn't been a dead card in my hand in a really long time. So I didn't really want to cut 2 of either, so I really just trimmed back 1 of each, and I think there's an argument to be made for that because there are going to be scenarios where the only creature in your hand is a Phantasmal Image against like a controlling deck, and Reejerey very often dies to efficiently costed removal like Bolt or Fatal Push, and you don't really want to trade your 3-drop for those 1-drop removal spells. So having these effects at a 3 of rather than a 4 of seems like the best decision balance-wise in my mind. Apart from those card choices, it's pretty much a stock mono blue list. I've been running 16 islands to try to stymie all of the decks running Field of Ruin. I made a post on Reddit about this idea a little while ago. Now, something like 20% of winning decks in Modern are running Field of Ruin in some number in the main deck. So that's like 1 in 5 opponents is going to be running 3 or 4 Field of Ruin in their main deck. And if they keep a hand like Overgrown Tomb and Field of Ruin, they could be kept off of their double-colored mana spells for a long time, like Liliana, Veil, Kolaghan's Command, things like that. Although Jund actually doesn't run Field of Ruin, so that's not the best example. But these decks, like Blue-White Control, Black-Green Rock, they need their colored sources to get things going. And if you can keep them on basically a useless Field of Ruin that kind of acts as a basic waste, then you can pull really far ahead in the game. I found it to be a really effective strategy. I've gotten much more utility and value out of stymieing Field of Ruin than I have ever gotten from picking up an Oboro in response to Liliana making me discard something. People talk about how great that utility is from Oboro, and how great it is that you can filter your Mutavault mana with Oboro. But those are such fringe situations that might come up in like 1 in every 50 or 100 games. Whereas, as I mentioned, you play against a Field of Ruin opponent 1 in 5 games. So once a league, you're going to play against a Field of Ruin opponent. They don't always get stuck on Field of Ruin, but I've won more games by screwing the opponent's Field of Ruins than I can ever remember having won because of running Oboro. So 16 islands is feeling good. Looking over to the sideboard, we've got the sort of core playset of Deprive. Don't need to explain those. 2 Dismembers at this point. We do need removal at this point in sort of the format's development against things like Dark Confidant and Tireless Tracker that can just totally destroy us with card advantage. There's not a ton of creature-based combo right now, but there's just value creatures that we need to be able to deal with. I actually bring 2 Dismembers in against decks like Mono Blue Tron, just because I want to be able to deal with Walking Ballista if it resolves. I've always hated, as I'm sure you guys do too, like losing to single cards. There's also Platinum Angel in Mono Blue Tron, that's another thing that Dismember can deal with. So yeah, Dismember, just a very versatile card. I like having 2 of them. Another thing that can interact with creatures is Echoing Truth. If we need to bounce something, or even like a couple of Tarmogoyfs, Echoing Truth is great for that. But really, Echoing Truth is in the deck to deal with other single card threats against Merfolk, like Ensnaring Bridge and Worship. And then Venser is like a different Echoing Truth. It's like an Echoing Truth on a body, or I don't know, it's like a boomerang on a body. But he can also bounce spells. So it's a very, very weird card. One of the coolest niche applications is being able to bounce an opponent's Supreme Verdict, since it's not targeting the spell, it's just putting it back in the opponent's hand. So if we've established a powerful board that can swing for lethal the next turn, the opponent tries to wipe it away with a Supreme Verdict, we can just bounce that spell with Venser. Unfortunately, Supreme Verdict is not the board wipe of choice these days. Terminus is. So Venser not as good against Terminus as he is against Supreme Verdict, but Venser is another thing that can bounce an Ensnaring Bridge or a Worship. It can also bounce anything else. It can bounce an Ugin, and then when they try to recast the Ugin, you can counter it with a Deprive, maybe even a Spell Pierce. So just a super flexible guy. You want to bring it into any matchup that you expect to go kind of long, like against mid-range decks. He's fantastic because bounce whatever's stopping you. If the opponent has a blocker protecting their planeswalker, just bounce the blocker and then swing at the planeswalker with Venser. So Venser are a neat combination of like a boomerang effect with a body. So some people are running 2 Vensers, 2 Echoing Truths. I feel like that's a little bit overkill. We don't often run into these decks running Ensnaring Bridge or Worship, so it feels fine to me to limit these at 2, since often the games that play those cards go fairly late. We're going to have time to draw into these guys to bounce those annoying cards. 2 Vendilion Cliques seem fantastic against a broad swath of the metagame. Again, any decks that want to go late against us, like Tron or control decks looking to draw into board wipes, you want to click them during their draw step and take away any major threat. It also leaves you with a 3/1 flyer, which can be pretty good. Surgical Extraction is another sort of recent evolution in Merfolk decks. It works really, really well, I think for the same reason that Spell Pierce works really, really well. We want to squeeze in as much efficiency into the first few turns of the game as possible. Surgical Extraction is amazing at that because it costs literally sort of 0 mana. You can just pay 2 life. And against many powerful decks in the format right now, it just neuters them. So against Bridgevine, if they play a bridge, you just surgically extract that and they're totally off the bridge plan for the rest of the game. You just immediately exile all of their bridges. Similarly, you can hit their Vengevines or anything else in their graveyard that seems like it's central to their plan that you want to sort of neutralize immediately. It's really good against these Arclight Phoenix decks. You can just pull all 4 of those guys out right away. Really, really good against Dredge. You can hit any Dredge card early in the game that they happen to get into the graveyard to keep them off of filling up their graveyard further. Potentially more impactful is hitting something like a Conflagrate so that they can't wipe your board. Hit a Prized Amalgam so they can't really attack you for too much. It's really great against a lot of decks. I think I might want to be on 4. Currently, I only own 3. But I'm pretty solid on the 5 pieces of graveyard hate right now. There's just a number of decks that want to utilize the graveyard right now, whether it's like all-in graveyard strategy or just something like Black-Green Rock or Blue-White Control using Snapcasters and Search for Azcantas and things like that. You want answers to the graveyard, and I think 5 cards feels really solid. So the balance of those 5 cards, not 100% sure. Stoneheart is on 1 Graftdigger's Cage, which is pretty spicy. I haven't seen that card around too much. Obviously really good against Coco and Cord decks. Also solid, I guess, against Control, since it turns their Snapcasters off. I guess you would bring it in against those guys. Great against Dredge, keeps their creatures from coming back from the graveyard. Great against Arclight. All those decks that I was just mentioning previously. So, in summary, you've got 5 graveyard hate spells. You've got 4 counter spells, 4 deprives, backing up your main deck for spell pierces. So against like combo matchups, ad nauseum and such, Living End, where you really want access to counter spells, you're going to have 8 counter spells post board, which just feels really solid. Also against combo, Titan Shift, those kinds of things where they have big singular payoff cards, Vendilion Clique's going to do a great job. We've got a couple bounce effects and 2 Dismembers as versatile creature removal. So that's where I am with my modern mono blue Merfolk list. Please let me know your guys' thoughts on the deck, on the theory behind it, and yeah, let me know what you guys are running right now, whether it's feeling good. If there are any cards that you wish were modern legal that could sort of kick Merfolk up a notch. Any card ideas that you wish would be printed into the format. These past few months have just been sort of an intense period of brewing and development, I think, for all of us Merfolk pilots since we've gotten Trickster. And I think we're getting to a good point. Nikachu has been doing really, really well in the challenges. Stoneheart has had 3 competitive League 5-0s in like the last week and a half. So just really spectacular results. M. Hayashi had a recent 5-0. So we're starting to claw our way back into the format. I think it has a lot to do with all of this careful thinking that we've been doing lately with the deck. So please share your thoughts with me. Thanks for joining me today. Please check out my Patreon page. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please leave comments down below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks a lot. Bye.